Right, so last year I bought myself a Kindle, and in about November I bought every story that H.P. Lovecraft ever wrote for 50p, and I finished them all last night. It took me like 5 months, and since the start I've been thinking, oh, well, at the end I'll do a video of like the top 5 best Lovecraft stories, because like he's a massive influence on a lot of modern horror. Wow, I bet I'm gonna love it. I didn't account for the fact that he was a horrible racist.
My cup of tea. My cup of tea.
So H.P. Lovecraft, or Horrible Person Lovecraft, was an author in the early 20th century. He wrote a lot of like weird fiction, like science fiction kind of horror stuff, and some of it's pretty good. But before I tell you the actual 5 stories that I thought were best, I just want to go over the fact that you cannot escape the racism in these stories. It's not even subtle. And when I was compiling my top 5 favourite stories from all of these stories, I pretty much discounted anything that was overtly racist. As I was reading them, I was just like, I'm not enjoying this because, oh my god, it's just, there's some good stories, and then he's just like, oh, and here's a horribly derogatory statement about people of another race. Thanks, Lovecraft, you just ruined your own book for me. So a story like The Rats in the Walls, hey, that's pretty good. Unfortunately, the cat's name in the story is just a racial slur. It would have been pretty good if he hadn't done that. And you can say all you want about him being a product of his times, but no, there is actually no place for this anymore. So, first of all, Lovecraft. Second of all, here's my top 5 Lovecraft stories. My top 5 are pretty much some of the longer stories. Of the shorter stories, there's a couple ones that I think are really good. The Outsider is quite a good story. Basically, someone reads about the real world all their life, and they're really excited to get out there and meet people, and then they leave their home and everyone is terrified of them, and they look in the mirror and they're a horrible monster. It's written in like a really nice way, and it kind of echoes like Lovecraft's kind of feelings of isolation and loneliness. It's a good story. And also The Picture in the House is just a really good, short, scary story. A guy gets caught in a storm and he sees a house off the road, and he goes over to it, lets himself in, and it's full of like these spooky old books. The guy who lives in the house is like, oh, you're fine to stay here until the storm stops. But then he starts talking about all these creepy books. And that story's really good, I think, until the house gets struck by lightning and the story ends. It's not a good ending, but the rest of the story's pretty good. Also, if you want a good adaptation of that story, go on YouTube and check out the Dunwich Horror and other Lovecraft stories. I'll look it up and like probably put a link in the description, but it's like a stop motion animated thing, and it's got the Picture in the House, the Dunwich Horror, and the Festival, I think, and it's genuinely super creepy. I think stop motion animation is great, and it's used very effectively in this video. But on to the 5 top stories. I'm so sorry that I've just spoken for 8 minutes about how racist Lovecraft was instead of actually getting to the topic of the video. At number 5, The Case of Charles Dexter Ward. This story follows a weird dude who becomes obsessed with one of his ancestors who was accused of witchcraft. There are going to be spoilers for all these stories. I'm sorry if you've not read these 100-year-old books. You're probably not going to. He becomes obsessed with his ancestor, and over the course of the story you kind of learn more about the ancestor and how the descendant is behaving more and more like his ancestor. And I wonder what's going on here. He brought the ancestor back to life and has been killed and replaced by them. I think the story here is generally really good. The twist is very obvious. This is probably one of the longest Lovecraft stories. Because of that, having the twist be very obvious from near the start is not as forgivable as it is in other ones. But I still think it's quite a well-written story. It does a nice job of like having the fear of the unknown that Lovecraft's known for. Genuinely pretty good. Like even when the plot was quite obvious and I kind of knew where it was going from the start, the writing made it enjoyable. At number 4, it's At the Mountains of Madness. This one might have a bit of an edge. Basically, At the Mountains of Madness came first, then came the book The Thing, which is loosely based on At the Mountains of Madness, and then the movie The Thing came out with Kurt Russell that's loosely based on the book The Thing. It's at the South Pole. There's all kinds of weird stuff going on. Basically, there's an expedition to the South Pole, and they find these huge mountains, like mountains bigger than Everest, and they start excavating some of the stuff in these mountains because they find these caves, and they find all these like old bodies of like alien creatures. Pretty much everyone on the expedition dies apart from 2 people. There's a big storm, and some of the bodies go missing, and you think, oh no, the aliens things have come to life. But then the 2 people who are left fly up into the mountains and find like this ancient city, and they're exploring the city and they're learning more about these aliens from like the carvings and stuff on the wall. And you discover that these are like ancient beings who lived on Earth before humans, and they kind of lived all around the world, but then they got pushed back to just the South Pole, and it's because they created some like creatures to like serve them, but they became too powerful and killed them all. And the real thing to be scared of is not the old aliens, but these giant like amorphous blobs that will destroy you. It's really good, and I didn't see the twist coming. Like I thought, oh well, these Lovecraft stories have kind of been obvious so far. It'll be like the aliens came back to life and killed everyone, but no, it's these giant blobs, and it's pretty scary, and it's really good. I like this one a lot. Number 3, it's The Whisperer in Darkness. This one is all about like mushroom people who live in the mountains. My descriptions of all of these are gonna make them sound incredibly stupid. It makes more sense once you read. So there's a guy who works at the Arkham University, Miskatonic University. It crops up a few times in Lovecraft stories. He's recently been in contact with someone who lives up in the mountains who believes that there's these fungus people living there or something. I can't remember the fungus. They're kind of like crabby fungus people. It's been a while since I've read this one. This one was quite near the start. They have kind of this correspondent, the guy who works at the university is quite skeptical, but the other guy just keeps sending him evidence. Like he sends him like these carved stones that he's found. He sends them this record of the noises that he hears played. As it kind of goes on, the guy who is sending all these reports is just recounting like he keeps hearing the clicking of these alien voices, and it's getting closer, and they're kind of attacking his house at night, and he keeps getting dogs to scare them off, but he keeps finding the dogs have been killed. And the guy who's sending all these letters sends the letter to the guy at the university saying, it's okay, I spoke to the aliens, and they just want to help, they just want to get along with humans. Come down to my house and I'll introduce you to the aliens. Not seeing that it's an obvious trap, the guy goes to meet this man at the train station. Someone else picks him up and says, oh, your host is quite ill and you'll be able to speak to him when we get to the house, but he sent me to pick you up because he's ill. And the guy's like, hey, this is really creepy, but okay. And he gets there and all the lights are out, and he gets led into this room to speak to the guy who he's been writing letters to all this time. He can barely see him. He's all like hunched in the corner in this chair. He's kind of whispering like he's lost his voice because he's meant to be ill, and he's like explaining all this stuff. Oh, the aliens can take us to their home planet and show us all these wonders, and all you need to do is like have them remove your brain and put it in one of these jars, and then they can transport it. I like this one a lot because it's so out there. And then the protagonist, the guy from the university, goes to bed, and then he hears like the door open, and he hears like the clicking noises that he's been told about on the radio, and he's like, oh my god, all the aliens are here. And he just like pretends to be asleep through it all, and he goes to sneak out in the middle of the night when they've all left, and he goes to where the guy who's talking to us, and he just finds like the face and hands just in the chair. They killed him, and someone was pretending to be that guy. It's really good at building this tension and genuinely really scary. And it's a good twist at the end. Lovecraft quite often just does a ridiculous twist that is stupid, or a really obvious twist that doesn't shock you as much as it should. But this one's a pretty good one. All in all, this is one of the better ones. At number 2, it's The Shadow over Innsmouth. One of the more Cthulhu-y stories. I've not really mentioned Cthulhu at all. Call of Cthulhu is the one where you get to meet Cthulhu, like he's actually in the story. I don't think it's that good. Like, it's alright, it's just really stupid. There's a lot of the racism that I've mentioned before in the Call of Cthulhu, and also they get chased by Cthulhu and they drive a boat into him, and it's really stupid. So I'm not a big fan of that one. But Shadow over Innsmouth, while tied to the Cthulhu mythos, it's kind of its own thing. Like, you don't need to know anything about Cthulhu and all this. It's just scary because it's something that we've all kind of felt before. So our protagonist is kind of exploring this part of the country that he's discovered. He's been like looking up his family heritage, and he's travelled back to Arkham to learn some more and travel to his next destination. He decides, well, it's quite cheap to travel through Innsmouth via the bus, so I'll do that. And he goes to Innsmouth, and it's just a really weird place. Everyone's kind of viewing him with some suspicion because he's an outsider, and people don't usually come here because it's kind of shunned by all the other locals from the nearby towns. He finds out that he's gonna have to stay overnight because the bus is broken down. So he books into the hotel, and while he's got some time, he thinks, oh, I'll go investigate the rest of the town. And he's speaking around, and people are like telling him not to ask so many questions. He speaks to this old drunk guy, and he's talking about like how they're fish people or something. And there's recently been like a cult growing in this town. It's called like the Church of Dagon, who's another like Cthulhu mythos character. But that's like been building up, and it's kind of taken over as the main religion in this town. And overnight, he goes to sleep in his room, and he hears like footsteps outside, and people have come up to his room. He barricades the door and he climbs out the window, and it's that feeling of being somewhere new and quite a small secluded town where you don't know anyone and you're very much an outsider. It's that feeling of paranoia, like you don't know what everyone else is. Hey, maybe those footsteps outside my room are nothing, or maybe it's a lot of angry cult members coming to get me. So he escapes out the window, he makes it out of the town and like hides in the bushes on the road until he can hitchhike somewhere the next day. And then there's a really good twist at the end that he does some more digging in his family heritage. He finds that he is descended from people who come from Innsmouth. He's beginning to find himself kind of turning into a more like fishy person, because there's a whole thing like the people of Innsmouth like bred with these fish people. At a certain age, they will become like fully fishy and return to the sea where they'll live under the sea. And this guy's finding that happening to him. And that's a really good twist. It's a really effective twist. It's a scary, ironic way to end your story, and it's really good. Finally, number 1, the best Lovecraft story, in my opinion, is The Colour Out of Space. It's not really tied to anything else in the Cthulhu mythos or the dream cycle, which I've not talked about at all. I think it's really bad. I didn't really enjoy any of the dream cycle stories, to the point where I got like quarter of the way through the dream quest of Cadith or whatever it's called, and I just had to stop because it was so boring and such nonsense that I just didn't care. So I'm sorry to all of you Lovecraft scholars who are like watching the video. But The Colour Out of Space, it's not tied to anything else. It's a story about how a meteorite lands in this small village near this farmer, and at first he notices it's making all his like crops grow unusually big, but when they eat them, they find they're all rotten and you can't eat them. All the animals on the farm have gotten sick and died and kind of rotted away in a really gross way, and all the crops have died and like all the plant life around. And then the family themselves, the wife starts like going mad, and one of the children like falls in the well and drowns, and one of the other kids goes mad, and the other one just disappears. And it's told from the point of view of a friend of the family, and you find out that the family is kind of slowly being like pushed out of the village, like no one wants anything to do with them. The friend of the family doesn't hear from them for a couple of weeks, and he goes over to the farm and he finds the husband. He's sat there and he doesn't really know what's going on, and he's like, "Oh, can you check on my wife?" And he goes upstairs and he finds like the wife in her room has kind of rotted away, and like it's just this horrible description in the book. And he comes back downstairs, and the same thing happens to the husband when he sees him, and he runs away to get the police to like find out what's going on, and they all come back, and overnight they get kind of stuck in the farmhouse as there's just this like deep rumbling outside as the meteorite kind of collects itself back up and flies out of the well, and they see like this colour that they've never seen before, and it's the colour out of space. And I just think this one is so good at like slowly building that tension, and you know something horrible is going on but you can't quite place it, and it's the absolute best Lovecraft story because it's its own self-contained thing, and while it doesn't fully explain everything, it doesn't need to. This cosmic colour, this entity that's come from space, and it's fed off all the surrounding life, and now it's left. And there's a really good film adaptation of this one. It's a German movie. I think it came out a few years ago. I watched it on Amazon, and it's all in black and white apart from the colour out of space, which is like bright purple. And I think it's really well done, and it's quite a hard novel to adapt, I feel, but I think they did a really good job. But yeah, the colour out of space it's maybe the only one of Lovecraft stories that when I read it I was genuinely scared and on edge. So that's it. Like 5 months of reading for however long this video is gonna be. Would I recommend you read every one of Lovecraft stories? Absolutely not. Please don't do this. The ones that I've mentioned are some of my favourites. They pretty much stand up on their own. So if you want to get into it, I would recommend like reading some of those. There's quite a few good shorter stories. Unfortunately, a lot of them are very racist, and not just in like the language that they use, but also the whole narrative of the story is just an excuse to support Lovecraft's views on other races. Stay away from the horror Red Hook. Stay away from the street. They're horrible. They're really bad stories, and they are just racist. In conclusion, remember Lovecraft for his contribution and his influence on the horror genre, but also never forget that he was just horrifically racist, and he's not some idol to be revered. It's better viewing him through his effect on horror as a whole, rather than looking at all his stories, because honestly, like 50% of them are just not worth it. And I'm really sorry. Maybe even more. Maybe like 70% of his stories are just like, eh. But he's got some really good ones. Lovecraft's best remembered for being an inspiration for other writers to go on and adapt his novels or take them in a new direction. A book I've not even mentioned, From Beyond. It's like a tiny short story, but it's pretty interesting. And then the 1980s movie, From Beyond, is just amazing. It takes the potential of this small story and just expands upon it, makes it way more interesting than Lovecraft's story ever was. Same with Herbert West Reanimator. The actual novels are kind of trashy and rubbish, but then the movie adaptation is great. So that's it. Maybe read Lovecraft, don't read all of it like I did, because that's an absolutely stupid thing to do. Watch some Lovecraft adaptations though, because they're great. From Beyond, Reanimator, The Thing, is Lovecraft inspired. A lot of Stephen King novels are inspired by Lovecraft. That's it. I'm gonna stop talking. I've been going forever. Never forget, Lovecraft was horrifically racist, probably also very sexist, but there are like no female characters in any of his stories. And also he claimed to not know that gay people existed until he was 30 years old, because he's such an idiot. Oh my god. If you've read a lot of Lovecraft, let me know your favourite story in the comments. Actually, more interesting, let me know your favourite Lovecraft adaptation, because there's a lot of great ones, and I feel like they take his work way further than he ever could. Like and subscribe and whatever, and I'll see you in a bit. I'm not going to take 5 months to read a book next time.